The Australian Financial Review.
I go back to my outward bound experience. What I discovered is my mental strength was way above anyone else in the group. So when people were melting down because of either physical or the fact that we're lost in the bush or whatever, I had the mental strength to go, you know what, and take a leadership role. When you're employing someone, I normally make my decision within the first 5 minutes.
Hi, I'm Sally Patton, editor of Boss from the Australian Financial Review, and welcome to 15 Minutes with the Boss, a podcast about success and failure and everything in between. And along the way, we're hoping to get some really great advice from our leaders. My guest today is John Carfi, the Chief Executive of Ingenia. Hi, John. How are you?
I'm well, thanks, Sally.
Thank you so much for coming into our lovely dark studio.
It's an absolute pleasure and really nice to meet you.
Now, John, you're the Chief Executive, as I said, of Ingenia, which is a developer of affordable housing for downsizing baby boomers. The company has $2.5 billion of owned and managed properties across 100 sites along Australia's east coast. And I believe that this year you expect to record earnings before tax and interest of between $162 and $165 million. Have you always been interested in property?
Oh, absolutely. So I've been involved in real estate in one way, shape or form since about 1987, so relatively young. I started a cadetship with Lend-Lease. Prior to that, no involvement whatsoever. The family didn't come from a construction or property business. And it's funny, it's one of those things. I remember walking on a building site for the first time down at Darling Harbour in 1987 and just thinking, like, I get this immediately, you know. It's just something I understood everything very, very clearly. It was all very obvious to me, and also the process and the physical elements and the things that needed to be done were almost intuitive immediately.
Interesting. Okay. We haven't got long, only 15 minutes. The clock starts now. Let's get going. What time do you get up in the morning? Tell me about your morning routine.
Pretty boring, Sally. So I get up at 4:40 every morning.
That's very specific. Very
specific. I need the alarm. It's all timed to perfection. So, within 10 minutes, I'm out the door with my gym gear on, do a good hour or so workout at the gym. And then by sort of, 10 past 7, I'm at my desk with a strong coffee, scan the papers, scan my emails, a little bit of quiet time for thinking and planning the day ahead in terms of what I want to achieve. Then really, really important for me, think about all the things I need to do to make sure my team can be productive during the day. I would hate to think that someone's lost a day of productivity because they're waiting on me to make a decision, respond to an email or make a phone call.
Okay. And are you a breakfast or not a breakfast guy?
I'm a non-breakfast guy. I like the idea of feeling hungry. Fasting from, dinner time until whenever it is you choose to eat, I find gives me a good feeling internally.
So what time would you have lunch then?
I don't have a fixed time, and I think that's really important for me, so I don't use the clock. So, anything from between 12:30 and 2:30 in the afternoon, it just depends.
If you find that it's super productive to be hungry while you're working, do you also suffer from the sort of mid-afternoon slump when you have eaten lunch?
Well, that's very interesting, and I could talk about this for hours, Sally. So about 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, I decided to, after a little bit of research, go off highly processed carbohydrates and sugar, with the expectation I would lose weight and all of that. The one thing I didn't expect, and probably took about 2 weeks to start happening, that unfogging of the brain, that fog that you get at 2:30 in the afternoon, you eliminate that sort of cyclical or circadian rhythm in the brain, and you just get this constant switched on, unfogged mental activity. It is amazing.
So another productivity hack, no sugar and no highly processed foods.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. I love that.
By it.
Question number 2. Tell me about a pivotal moment in your career, a project that you were put on or a career change that you had or something that really changed the trajectory of what you were doing.
I was working for Lend-Lease and they sent me on Outward Bound. Outward Bound is a program. I think it's an international organisation that runs, I suppose, outdoor adventures essentially, but it probably more focused, this particular course that I did, on management skills by putting you in high pressure situations. And that consisted of a group of people spending 26 days in the Australian bush, including 3 days that you spend absolutely alone. And I thoroughly enjoyed it, both from a physical and from a mental perspective. And I came back and I looked at myself in the mirror and said, from now on, I'm going to take my career more seriously, and I'm going to take considered steps in my life to, be a better person. Not necessarily a light bulb moment, but a point at which I suppose you decide that freewheeling teenager starts being a considered adult that, is probably more thoughtful about what you do, how you do it, and how you present yourself to the world. What I discovered is my mental strength was way above anyone else in the group. So when people were melting down and all that sort of stuff, because of either physical or the fact that we're lost in the bush or whatever, I had the mental strength to go, you know what, and take a leadership role. Right, here's where we are. There's where we need to be. We need to do this. You can rest for 5 minutes and we're going to get going and we're going to do this.
And you also discovered that you had leadership capabilities, which maybe you didn't realise before?
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah.
And so you said that you took steps afterwards to move forward in your career. What steps did you come back and take?
Not to take yourself too seriously, definitely not, but, sort of portray strength and leadership in how you dress, your posture, how you act, and how you speak and respond to people. And it became sort of, I suppose it was natural, maybe something you're subverting because you want to be part of the crowd. But it was quite natural for me to do that. I just had to do it more consciously, even that was natural.
Interesting. So that strength that you uncovered and those leadership qualities, you just basically took those and honed in on them and addressed them in your life.
Pretty well. And without getting into the psychology of it, life, your circumstances point you in a certain direction, and we immigrated from Italy. We lived in low socioeconomic areas, went to school in rough and tumble schools. You learn to deal with that through tools, right? To break out of that, which is probably not natural anyway, back to where you think you belong. And that moment made me think, okay, I've play acted for the best part of 18 years in order to get through life. I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to be who I am. So you're not acting anymore. You're now being yourself,
Yeah, interesting. Okay, next. What is the best piece of career advice you've ever been given?
I could go on for hours, but you know what? One of the simplest things someone told me, and it goes, I suppose it leverages off that same story, be yourself because everyone else is taken.
So do you want to explain that?
In business, everyone wants to network and do this and do that and put on a persona of someone that you're not or whatever. And ultimately, you're only kidding yourself, right? You are who you are. You've got strengths and weaknesses. You leverage off your strengths and, you try and compensate for your weaknesses. But trying to be someone else, you're just kidding yourself.
So one of the criticisms that is often levelled at leaders in Australia is that Australians tend to like to be liked, which can make sometimes making hard decisions very difficult. Do you fall into that bucket, or do you not care if people don't like you?
I think I'd be lying if I said I didn't care, but I would prefer, if I had a choice, I'd rather be admired than liked. So therefore, do the things that give you admiration. What I don't want is a bunch of people telling me they like me because I go along with everything and behind my back saying, the guy's a fool or whatever. He shouldn't have done that, or he should have dealt with that issue. I think admiration is a better form of like than, he's a really good guy. He had a drink with us. I don't drink with the team. I don't do any of that because I need to separate the leadership role from, John's a good guy and he went out with us or whatever. It's not something I aspire to.
That's a really good way of framing it, actually. You'd rather be admired than liked.
Absolutely.
On that note, we are going to take a short break, but John, don't go away. When we come back, we're going to open our incredibly lo-fi chatterbox. Welcome back to 15 Minutes with the Boss. I'm here with John Carfi, the CEO of Ingenia. Now, John, as promised, nay, threatened, this is our Chatterbox section. In front of you is this really beautiful, shiny brown box. Inside are about 15 to 20 questions. I'm going to ask you to have a bit of a fish around, pick out some questions, and we can get moving. What are some no-nos when applying for a job? You presumably interviewed lots of people over the years. What are some of the mistakes that people make?
I think the biggest mistake people make is not doing their research. You know, when you're employing someone, I rarely take a short-term view. If I employ anyone, I'm employing on the basis they're going to be with us for 30 years and, you know, get a gold watch and at the age 65. I would hope that they've targeted our organisation and not just looking for a job. Now, you are going to find people that are just looking for a job, but so as a minimum, I would expect that to have done enough research to understand the organisation's its objectives and whatever. There's plenty of publicly available information. Read the annual report, all of that sort of stuff. I would expect that as a minimum, and often I've been disappointed when people really have no idea about the organisation, but they're looking for a career in that organisation.
And do you have a favourite interview question?
I used to have a stack of them or whatever, but all the standard, where do you see yourself in 5 years or 10 years? Interestingly, with me, maybe a lot of people are like this, but I'll admit it. I normally make my decision within the first 5 minutes because you do get that sense with people. And something I've been to the Chicago booth doing an advanced strategy MBA, and they talk about luck and intuition, and I think some of that stuff's real. You do form a view very, very quickly. I'm not saying your view can't be changed; it can, but I form a view within the first 5 to 10 minutes.
Interesting. So a lot of that would be based then, I guess, on how much they know about the company.
Absolutely.
Because that would come up very early in the piece.
Absolutely. Within the first 10 minutes, I think you can make the decision about not hiring. I think the to hire, once you get down to the 2 or 3 candidates where you thought they're both good, that's a much tougher decision. Then You're weighing up pros and cons. The do not hire are generally within 10 minutes.
So I guess the lesson there is you need to make a good impression in the first few minutes. I guess that's probably true of almost all interviews.
Absolutely. And I think, I take that same attitude when I'm doing business. I've got 5 minutes to establish rapport and credibility. And if I haven't done it by then, the person's lost interest. And saying that you're always dealing with different personality types, but, a lot of leaders, unfortunately, you get to leadership roles predominantly because you have those characteristics.
I love it. Great advice. Have another fish in the box. Thank you. What's something, or perhaps the one thing, that other people worry a lot about, which you don't worry about?
Yeah, I think, some people worry about unknowns, particularly, different personality types, but some people need the future spelled out in step forms to give them confidence. And others, I suppose, can see that there's a path to the end. And even though it's not obvious, intuitively, that you can get there. And I go back to my outward bound experience. The thing that freaked people out was not knowing where we're going and how we're going to get there. And I sit there and go, well, I know we're going to get there because 1,000 people have done this before me. It's possible. We will get through it. So I don't fret or get concerned or bogged down on those sorts of issues.
So you've got confidence that whatever the challenge is, you'll get there.
Yeah.
And do you always know where you're going?
You know what you want to achieve, the objective, and there's always a little bit of ability to move there depending on how things play out. I don't necessarily know exactly how we're going to get there all the time. You'll have a good strategy laid out and a plan, but you want enough flexibility to pivot as and when required, sometimes using intuition and sometimes using data in order to do that. So I wouldn't say I don't know, I do know, but I'm happy to keep it relatively fluid to make sure A, I don't miss an opportunity, and B, I can pivot if circumstances change. I don't need a rigid layout of, how we're going to, of steps to get there.
Okay, interesting. All right, have another fish in the box. Thank you. Do you have a favourite productivity hack to help you get more out of your day?
I suppose as part of my morning routine, I do sit and think at certain points in time during the day to remind myself, is what I'm doing the most productive thing to meet the objectives of the organisation, either in the short term or the long term? Because if it isn't, then should I be doing something else as a result? And when I'm in meetings, the same thing applies. I continually remind myself, is this a productive meeting? Do I need to be here, or do these other people need to be here for the right level of productivity for the organisation? So they're just constant reminders. I also use my diary very, very effectively. So I've got a colour-coded diary for all the different activities to make sure that, once again, they're all productive things, and different colours means more important than other things to make sure I'm productive. And I think this is really important for any leader. I have a very close working relationship with my executive assistant. So typically I sit down with her at least once a week or once a fortnight and go through the things that are important at this point in time, the people that are important, so she knows they get access to the diary versus people that are maybe less important right now that don't need as much access to the diary.
So if you're constantly going through the day thinking about how you need to be the most productive, to what extent can you tweak what you're doing during the day or change meetings to make sure that you are being more productive? Because you may have meetings banked up all day. Lots of CEOs do, right?
Yeah, look, it's not easy, right? And the other thing, you've got to be accessible in my view. I do have an open door policy, and I do like to be accessible to staff and also to stakeholders. So, it is limited, and that's why that morning routine of mine are looking at the day ahead and then trying to triage from that point based on productivity, or looking a week ahead with my EA is probably more to the point. But I think the ability, when you've been invited to do a 2-hour meeting, to sit in it for 15 minutes and say, okay, I can't contribute any more in a meaningful way. I'm going to leave the meeting and, let you guys carry on with it. So quite often I'll do things like that.
On that note, that is the end of the Chatterbox section. Congratulations. I now have one more question for you, and that is, if you weren't the CEO of Ingenia, what would you be doing?
I think I need to be kept busy and doing something that's fulfilling and also productive. So I go and live in somewhere in southern Italy, probably Sicily, find somewhere near a winery, then just literally walk into the winery and offer myself as free labour in exchange for obviously learning something about operating a winery, but also to be able to sample the output of that particular winery.
And do you think you'd come back to Australia and run your own winery?
Maybe not a vineyard, maybe olives, peaches, truffles, whatever. It doesn't really matter. It's more about, having a purpose and being able to be productive, doing something you enjoy.
John, thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking to you today. I really like your advice that being admired is actually more important than being liked. So forget the being liked at all costs. I really like your advice to people applying for jobs. Do your research and make sure that you give a good first impression in the first 10 minutes, because that is the same in business in general. You really need to develop a good rapport very early on. And I also really like the way you use diet as a productivity hack. The fact that you like being hungry, that you have no fixed time to eat, and that you avoid the mid-afternoon slump by not eating sugar and complex carbohydrates. I'm going to try and give up chocolate tomorrow. So thank you again so much for allowing us to spend 15 minutes with the boss.
Thank you, Sally. It's been an absolute pleasure.
And thank you to everyone for listening. If you like the podcast and you want to hear more, consider sharing the podcast or writing a review, as it helps us to reach more people. And follow us wherever you get your podcasts. At the Financial Review, we investigate the big stories about markets, business and power. For more, go to afr.com, and you can subscribe to the Financial Review, the daily habit of successful people, at afr.com/subscribe. This podcast was hosted by me, Sally Patton, produced by Lap Fan and Martin Peralta. Our theme is by Alex Gower, and our executive producer is Fiona Buffini.
The Australian Financial Review.